today, the reason that I wanted you here, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, is we wanted to finish up our series. As you can see by the stop sign, stop attending church. If you haven't been here in the month of January, that might sound crazy. The other messages are on YouTube, so you can go hear the heart behind them. But really the whole purpose behind this series, I'm just going to tell you why we've been talking about what we've been talking about. The purpose behind this series was we want to make sure that everybody who attends these gatherings has the best possible experience. Most of you showed up in 2022. Most of you will show up in 2023, and you'll be a part of church gatherings. And just to be honest, we hope that you have awesome experiences while you're here. I hope that if you ever stage dive, everyone catches you. I hope that when we are worshiping, you experience the presence of God. We hope that you hear the voice of God. We hope that when we're gathering together, you would form lifelong friendships and you would feel super connected to the Spirit of God, that you would learn how to follow Jesus and you would discern what his calling is on your life. When we gather, we have high expectations. That's our hope. And sometimes that does happen. But other times, that is not everyone's experience. As a matter of fact, we are very aware that for some of us, our experience when we gather in these spaces, at least if you look at last year, sometimes it feels like we're not super connected, but we're actually disconnected. We sit in a crowd of people and we're if I'm being very honest, I don't trust anybody in this room, and I don't think anybody's really that close to me. We feel lonely even in a crowd of people. Sometimes we feel just disinterested or disengaged from what's going on up here, from everybody else's experience with God. We can kind of look around the room and get in our own heads and be oh, well, they look like they're connecting with Jesus, but I don't feel like that. And sometimes our experience in these gatherings can feel very disconnected and disengaging, and that can get discouraging. And we said, hey, this year, we don't want that for you. We want to tell you exactly how you can have the best possible experience in such a way where you're getting closer to Jesus, you're learning more about him, you're connecting more with him, you're connecting more with other people. So what we did was we just went and we looked at the very first followers of Jesus. We went and we looked at what we often refer to it as the early church, because it was the church right when it started. And we said, what did they do that made their lives and gatherings so powerful? Because if you read about it, it's in the book of Acts. If you read about the early church, you see that they didn't really tend to struggle with loneliness and disconnection the way we do. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that corporately, they seemed like they were a family, like they were in it together. They didn't seem to struggle with the disengagement levels that we see. But when they gathered together, they were expectant to experience the Spirit of God and the presence of God. And sure enough, you see them have some powerful experiences. When you look at them, their experience sometimes looks different than ours. So basically all we did this month was we just said, hey, what were the things that they were really committed to that we can also get committed to? What were the habits or the practices where they said, the attitudes that they had where they were hey, here is what I'm going to do for sure. I'm going to play my part. And that led to them having powerful, positive experiences. And if you were here a couple weeks ago, we said one of the things is they were really committed to being a community and not just a crowd. They pursued relationships with each other. They followed Jesus together. We also said they were committed to worship, not just watching, that when they got in spaces like these, they were doing whatever they needed to do to have an experience with God. And today, we're going to go over the last commitment. And we really believe that this year, if you will go through these commitments and you'll say, you know what, whatever it looks like for me, I'm going to do this thing, guarantee you your experiences here will get better. So before I say exactly what it is, can we go to Acts chapter 2? This is the passage we've been reading about them every week. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. These are all things they're committed to. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Notice this next, all the believers were together, keep going, and had everything in common. This is what I want us to catch. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Robert, can we go to I'll end that passage and we'll go to the next, I think it's Acts 20. I'm sorry, I'm being confusing. This is an early church leader talking to other church leaders. In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So just notice two things. When they were all together, they sold property and possessions to give to those people who had need. And you have, if you keep on reading the story, you have one of the leaders of the church going, guys, don't forget, it's more blessed. You're more blessed when you give rather than when you receive. And I think if Paul was communicating within our context of the commitments that we can make, I think he'd say something like, commit to giving over getting. That when we get in spaces like these, we should make a commitment to have the mindset, not just, hey, what did I get? Did I have a cool experience with God? Did I make a new friend? Did I like my experience? But he actually says commit to giving. That one of the questions we should ask ourselves after church services is, hey, what did I give today? To actually make a commitment to giving rather than just getting. And Pastor Gabe, I want to ask you, because you've grown up in church. So I'm sure that you've gone through different seasons of life where you had positive church experiences, negative, you had, certain attitudes at different seasons of life. I want to ask you, what changed for you? Because I genuinely believe that for every mature believer, as you follow Jesus, this is a switch you should make. Is at some point you should show up and you should go, I'm committed to giving over just getting. What changed for you? When did it change for you when you started saying, I'm going to show up not just to get, but to give?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up in church, my parents were pastors of a small church, and so I had attended church pretty much my entire life. I had been a part of church. I had done youth camp like maybe once or twice, and I think the shift for me started in my senior year and then kind of going into the year following me graduating high school. And I think for me, I had seen so many lives in our church, in our congregation, where people who at one time were followers of Jesus, and then I slowly would watch their lives change back to what they used to be. And I saw that road and where it led.
Yeah.
And so for me, I actually, as a young teenager, was looking at those things, and I was like, what do I want for my life? And why are these people at one time, would say they follow Jesus, and then they don't a year later? And I just looked at their life and like, what are the things that they're doing? And for me, what I noticed was they weren't necessarily following Jesus. They were just attending church on Sunday or Wednesday. They were kind of making it kind of a to-do list, and let me check this off the list. But in their week, they weren't actually pursuing him. And so for me, I was like, you know what? As a kid that's grown up in church, as a young person that feels called to ministry, feels called to minister to young people, it was like, I actually need to follow and love Jesus.
Yeah.
And as I started doing that over that 2-year period, I believe that's where the switch took place. Because for us, when we attended church, we had to work. Like, we were the ones setting up the chairs. Yeah. We were the ones cleaning, the bathroom, whatever it may be. But my heart changed. It wasn't just, I'm going to attend and I'm going to greet at the door, or I'm going to do this. No, it was actually like, Jesus, I am following you. Like, I love you. I want to get to know you better because he's designed my life. And it's like, how can I actually walk in that if I don't know my designer? Right. And so for me, that's where I think it switched, where it was like, I actually made a decision like, Jesus, I'm all in with you. And as a byproduct, it means I come to church to give.
Yeah, no, that's a great distinction to make. Like, this might sound crazy, but just think about the statement, okay? You can attend church and not follow Jesus. You can't follow Jesus and not attend church. We talked about that when we talked about committing to a community. Like, the church is really just the community that Jesus said he was going to build and he was going to commit himself to. And sometimes we can fool ourselves into thinking that because I showed up, like you said, I checked my Christian box and I kind of did the thing. But actually, part of what it means to be the church is to have that mindset. Somehow, some way, God says that when you follow him, it's more blessed to give rather than just to receive. And there are so many different ways that you can give. Like, there's so many different things that you can give. Myself, Pastor Gabe, many of us who are a part of Cottonwood Church, we give money. We practice this thing called a tithe, where maybe you've heard your parents talk about it. Literally, like 10% of our income at least whatever we get, we give it back to God via giving it to our local church to fund the work that is telling the story of Jesus to more people and serving more people in Jesus' name. That's one of the ways we give is via money. And you can do that. You can also give via your talent or your gifting. You might be familiar with this, but like over the course of a year, we probably have hundreds of people who give their gift in different ways across our church. When we have productions for Easter or Christmas and people sign up to serve and they sign up to act and to dance and to sing, like they're actually good at that stuff and they give their talent. I would never volunteer to do that stuff because I'm not good at it. Like it would just be awkward. Nobody would want to watch that performance. But other people, they sign up to sing. And when you see people who are here on a stage and they're worshiping or they're playing an instrument, like that's people giving their gift and people giving their talent. You can do it even if you're just creative and you're like somehow you're really good at design work. You love to create graphics, videos and stuff. Like that's another way that you can take your gifting and you can give it. To be honest, even if your gifting doesn't perfectly align with a space here at church, you can still give. If you're like, dude, I'm super awesome at ziplining, well, right now we don't have a space for you to do that within the serving context, but you can still give your time. You can still give your encouragement. You can still make sure that when you're present anywhere, you're going to make sure that somebody else feels at home. You're going to make sure that somebody else feels encouraged because your mindset is, well, I'm here to give. And one of the primary ways, the way I kind of want to zoom in on for this morning, one of the primary ways that people give is through serving, or the word, we also sometimes will use the word volunteering. You've all heard of what a volunteer is. It's someone who actually volunteers their time to do a specific project or to participate in a specific thing. We will often call it serving here. And really, there are so many different areas to serve. And when you show up on a Sunday morning and there are people out there with vests on, they are serving in the parking lot. Nobody is being paid to be there. They are just signing up to say, how can I give? I can help the flow of traffic. When you step on campus and there are people who are greeting and who are saying hello and trying to be welcoming and they're able to provide any information that people need, they're serving, they're giving. If you and your family ever walked into Building C, or right now you still do it to check in little siblings, like all the people who are in there who are leading classrooms, who are helping to teach kids the story of Jesus and just how good God is, like they're serving, they're giving their time. There are endless different ways that people serve, and there are endless different ways that people can give. And I know from my observation, as well as from my own experience, that when people sign up to serve, when people sign up to show up and give, that is probably one of the most transformative things they can do in their discipleship to Jesus. Obviously, it's connected to their heart with Jesus, right? Where they're saying, okay, God, I want to follow you. I want to be a participant in what you're doing. Pastor Gabe, I want to ask you the question because, like I said, you've been around church, so you've seen this happen with people. What are some of the benefits that you've seen people experience when they started serving? And maybe if you have a story to kind of highlight what that looks like, where have you seen that?
I think taking that scripture where it says it's more blessed to receive, to give than to receive, I think volunteering or serving is one of the biggest areas you will experience that. So, for example, we look at benefits, and a lot of times some people may think, like, should I do it? Because what's in it for me? But we actually get to see that scripture come alive. Like, all the leaders that are here, they're serving their time. They're answering your call or your text, whatever it may be. Like, they're giving of that. And if you ask them after a long period of time, it was always worth it. Like, I've always talked to leaders, and it's like, all the things that I did to help teenagers, it was worth it. Yeah. And for me, I've been able to kind of look at the backdrop of, tons of people that have gone through that and seen what God does in their life. And I think some of the cool examples I could think of is I remember Pastor Ryan when he was in high school. I remember going on a mission trip with Pastor Ryan when he was in high school and seeing, God transform, this kid who had a passion to help. Yeah. But it was just like him surrounding himself with the right people. I think about Pastor Grace. When I came on staff, she was actually our intern, and I think it's been cool to watch her growth just as a person, from somebody who never wanted to be on stage, who never wanted to be in front of people, And we would always tell her, like, Grace, you know there's something in you. Like, you know God has stuff for you. And then, like, years later, like, I'm talking 10 years later, you see what God does in her life. And so I would say one of the biggest benefits that I've seen through Pastor Ryan, through Pastor Grace, through Joya, tons of other leaders, that even some that are still here, is you have people there for you when good times are happening and when the bad times are happening. And I think that so often is a benefit that we don't think about. Yeah. We think like, oh, I can get through this stuff on my own. Like whatever challenge it may be, like maybe there's things at home like, oh, I don't need help. But when you're serving, when you're a part of a group for the greater good, is you are seen, you are heard, and you're not alone. Yeah. And I think that is probably the biggest benefit, is that you're able to go through life not by yourself.
I would imagine, like, when you use Ryan and Grace, as examples, and I'm sure you mentioned Joy, I'm sure she's experienced it too. I would imagine that also one of the best things about serving is if you're the type of person and you're like, yeah, I've never really, like, experienced God moving in my life, or I feel like I've never really seen him actually step in, perhaps, this is just a hypothetical, perhaps one of the reasons is that you've never really put yourself in a position where you actually needed God to step in. If you normally go about your life and you are in control of everything, which most of us are, like most of us, most of the time, we have some control over our lives. Normally, if you're always showing up to whatever you're doing and you're like, yeah, I'm in control of this situation. Nobody thinks that way, but it's how we live. You compare that to somebody who shows up and they really need a miracle to happen for them to do what they're trying to do. That person is literally putting themselves in a position to experience God. I think about so many times, like when people get different opportunities to speak or to lead worship settings or to kind of stand in front of other people and tell them about Jesus, whether it's in a church setting or anywhere. Like, if you've ever tried to do that, it is very intimidating. And it can be terrifying to feel like, wait a second, I'm supposed to stand up in front of people and be an example and tell them about Jesus. Like, that's an intimidating thing to do. Mm-hmm. And yet, when you take opportunities like that and you decide to do it, what you're doing is you're going, okay, God, I'm scared. And I don't think I can do what I'm supposed to do in my own power. But if you are real, can you please show up and help me? That happens when people serve all the time. When people for the very first time decide to lead a small group, when people for the very first time decide to put themselves out there and connect with lonely people, like, it is awkward, it is intimidating, you struggle with fear and insecurity, and yet when you still decide, I'm gonna do it, and you pray, God, if you're there, can you please help me? You're actually putting yourself in a position to experience him more. Compared to when you just kind of, show up and sit back and don't actually put yourself out there, because then it's like, well, why is God going to show up? And again, this isn't a hard and fast rule. I'm just trying to paint a picture that when you actually live out faith and you put yourself in that position, God, if you're there, will you show up? Well, then you get to see him show up.
I got a story. So this was actually before I was a youth pastor. I was actually just a leader. Yeah. As an example, this story just came to me. I remember after service, when kids would give their life to Christ. Yeah. All the leaders, we'd be up there praying for them. I remember meeting this kid, and I just told him, I was like, hey, we're going to pray, but I want you to pray big. I want you to ask God for something huge. And he his eyes got really big, and I was thinking oh, shoot, what did I just do? Yeah. And he basically goes, I would love to hear from my dad. And I thought oh, that's not a hard prayer. And he's like, but you got to understand, I haven't heard from my dad in 7 years. Yeah. He's like, I don't know where my dad lives. He's like, I don't have his phone number. And now I'm like, okay, God, I just told this kid to pray big. Yeah. And I have to now pray with him. Yeah. I remember praying, and I was just like, God, I don't know how you're going to do this. Yeah. But would you put his father back in contact with him? And I want to say the kid was probably 6th, 7th grade. Yeah. 2 weeks later, he walks in with the biggest smile on his face. And I'm like, so what happened? He's like, dude, this is when we still had phones in the house. Yeah. Phone randomly rings. He's like, we pick it up. And my dad, somehow through a cousin, got our number and called me. Now, I don't know if that relationship was ever restored, but that was just an example where I was like, God, I have no power to do this.
Yeah.
Like, there is no power within myself. Like, I need you to show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're talking about is when you are serving, when you are volunteering, is you are basically getting to the end of yourself.
Yeah.
And you are dependent upon God. And he has to show up.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's kind of crazy if you're just greedy. No, like, it takes courage. It takes faith, knowing that there may be a situation that you're approached with, and it's only by God and his grace that you can actually see him move.
Because at the end of the day, like, what we're trying to do here is we're actually trying to facilitate people experiencing God. Mm-hmm. So, like, every part that we're playing, it's just a part, and we're hoping that God then does his part. You know, when people serve in production and they're managing lights and sound and screens, like, there's a way to do that in an excellent way and to do it your due diligence. But there's no amount of lights or screens that we can use to actually make someone experience God. We're doing our part, and we're saying, God, you need to fill in the gaps. When somebody speaks on a stage or somebody sings a song, like, there is no amount of talent in the world that is going to cause somebody else to go, oh my gosh, I think I'm experiencing God. Like, that's not how it works. No, people use their gifts and they serve to the capacity that they're able, but God always needs to fill in the gaps. So there's so many benefits to serving. I want to talk about really fast as we kind of start to close. One of the reasons that we wanted Pastor Gabe here was because I actually wanted him to share about an opportunity with all of us. When you talk about serving and having positive experiences in doing it, last summer, you led a trip of a number of students. You led a trip to Alaska last summer. A number of people in our community went, and you guys, I believe your primary work out there at the time was you guys were helping out with like a summer Bible program for a church, as well as helping via some manual labor at that church. And I know you guys even did a couple of other things in terms of, connecting with some homeless people and providing them resources at Walmart. Walmart was a big deal if you were here and you heard Ocean talk about it. There was a number of things that came from that trip, and you guys are actually going to go again. Well, not the same exact group, but you are going to lead another trip there in July. Yep. Can you tell us a little bit more about that trip, and then like maybe just what you're most excited about for that?
Yeah, our trip will be going July 14th through the 21st, so we'll be there for a week. We'll be working with actually the same church that we worked with last year, in a different capacity. We're kind of working through, will we do a VBS again, or will we actually just do outreach with the church? I know one of the highlights for me was seeing young people actually minister to homeless, and just seeing the intimidation, but also seeing the faith factor. Of us being able to like minister to those people. And I know a lot of the students may be here. I saw a couple, Rudy, Isabella, I know Avery, that were on that team. And it's like, all right, God, like I'm going to put myself out there. So I think that's one of the cool things is the unknown factor. But I think it helps us grow in our faith. So July 14th through the 21st, we'll be going to Anchorage, Alaska. It'll be an adventure. You'll be able to serve. We're going to serve in different capacities. We'll probably do some manual labor, and then we're working with the churches if we're going to do a VBS again. Okay. Yeah.
That is one way that if you're interested and it's over the summer and you want to serve, that's one of the ways where you can say, hey, I'm going to show up to give something. I'm literally going to set aside time. You have to raise the money, right, to even be able to go, unless you're just sitting with like a bunch of money in your bank account, then I guess you don't have to raise it. But you have to raise the money to go. You have to set aside the time to go. And then when you're there to give to another church, to another community, to just help them in whatever their needs are. That is one way that you can give. That's one way that you can say, okay, God, I want to put myself in a position where I need to experience you. Because like you were saying, we don't know exactly what you guys are going to do there yet, but like walking up to a homeless person and trying to provide them resources and then potentially pray over them, that's intimidating.
Very intimidating.
You don't know how that's going to go.
Yeah, it's intimidating for me.
Yeah.
I had to do that.
Yeah.
I had to walk up to a group of homeless people. I think Ocean was with me. It was like at the end, we were just trying to get rid of the supplies we had. And there was actually a guy who was homeless, and he was in a dark place because his wife had died. Yeah. And they actually were like, hey, will you pray for him? Yeah. And everybody's looking at me because I'm the adult. Yeah. And you guys may think, oh, like you've been through that tons of times. No, it's still not easy.
No.
It's still terrifying.
Yeah.
I have to stand there and give this guy comfort
Yeah.
for something that I can't unchange.
Yeah.
And that I know is super painful. And there is no coming back from that. Like, his wife's not coming back. And I have to help him. And he's not in the most right mind.
Right.
I mean, you know, he's just out of it. And it's like, you see God move in such a way that when we walk away, are his problems fixed? No. But he's in a much better state when we left than when we walked up. I mean, some of them weren't even wearing clothes. Like, that's like, there's just so many factors that go into that. But God shows up. Yeah. And so...
whether it is you signing up to go on a trip like that over the summer, whether it is you considering, hey, is there another area of Cottonwood that I can actually give my time to in a different way? If you don't know where to start with any of that, like, please talk to one of us. We'd love to brainstorm with you. I will say that when it comes specifically to that Alaska trip, because Pastor Gabe isn't here all the time, if you do want more information about that, this isn't necessarily you committing and signing up to go, but if you do want any more information about that trip, and it sounds like something that you'd be interested in, if you just walk out to our counter, not now, after service, at our check-in counter, we'll have a piece of paper. Literally, we just need your name, your email address, and your phone number. This way we can get in contact with you to give you that information as it becomes available. But no matter what it looks like, whether it is going on a trip, whether it is joining a ministry, whether it is making people feel at home when you're here and being intentional about that, Jesus actually said it is more blessed to give than to receive. And this year, as we continue to have these gatherings, most of you are going to show up on a weekly basis. I'm just telling you that if you want to experience more of God and you want to see, hey, God, how can you actually use me to comfort other people, to help other people, to be a blessing to other people, what you can do is you can say, I'm going to commit to giving and not just getting. I'm going to enter spaces like these, and I'm going to put myself in position to say, God, will you help me to love and to serve and to care for this other human being in front of me? And I would love to hear the stories of what happens as more of us do that. I'd love to see how it transforms our community in so many different ways. Pastor Gabe, thank you so much for spending time with us. Would you mind just praying a prayer over all of us as we close this morning?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for having me. I will say we do have meetings for these for our trip.
Okay.
Our first info meeting will be February 19th.
There you go.
So that's why it's important if I get your phone number and stuff, I can reach out to your parents. But we don't just show up on that day.
Right.
Like, it's not like, oh, I just pay money, show up July 14th, and then I'm ready to go. No, we help prepare you. We help get you ready. So like Anthony was saying, like, there is a part of giving that goes into this. But what's crazy is when you give, just how great God is and how he has designed things, he naturally gives you. Yeah. Now, it may not come in the form of money. It may not come in the form of things that you're thinking about, but it comes in the form of what you actually need. Like, God knows what you need more than you know what you need. And so I think that's just a cool thing in that verse. Like, yes, we give, but God gives greater and more than we can ever give him.